I've got the pleasure of speaking with Danielle Gurreri, Vice President, Head of Product at Broadridge, about pass-through voting. Subject some people are familiar with, other people not so familiar. Danielle, pass-through voting, what is it and how does it work?
So pass-through voting refers to the practice of giving investors more of a voice in how asset managers vote proxies for underlying equities. So when you think about a mutual fund or a pooled investment vehicle and the equities that ultimately make up that pooled investment vehicle, today the asset manager is voting for the proxies that take place with those equities. With pass-through voting, it gives the right to the underlying investor to give their input ultimately to the asset manager, where the asset manager can determine how to use that input when they're voting on their behalf.
What are the drivers that have instigated this interest in pass-through voting, and why does it matter?
There are a few key trends that we're seeing that seem to be fueling interest in pass-through voting. The first is the rise of index funds. The past decade, we've seen an explosive rise in passively managed index funds. Today, passively managed funds accounts for more than 15 trillion in global AUM. Given this sharp rise, there's a growing spotlight on how passive funds vote the proxies for the corporations that they invest in. The second trend that we're seeing is fund investor expectations. Fund investors sometimes ask the companies that they invest in to incorporate specific voting policies for those funds that they invest in, knowing that the asset manager will be voting those equities on their behalf. In the past, acting on these requests required these asset managers to create separately managed accounts, or in other cases, asset managers created dedicated funds committed to certain, voting policies to vote in alignment with specific principles. Pass-through voting, however, enables fund investors to convey their vote preferences without the need to create a separate account or a new fund. So you're getting the cost savings of keeping a pooled investment vehicle, but you're being able to give your clients the ability or the flexibility to vote in accordance to their organizational policy views. And the third, trend that we're seeing is shareholder democracy. Now that an increasing number of retail investors have entered the market, advocates for shareholder democracy say that pass-through voting could be a great way to bring these investors into the process. Pass-through voting can be seen as part of a larger trend toward expanding individual investor participation.
What are some of the questions you are hearing from clients regarding the implementing of pass-through voting?
There are a few things to keep in mind if you're an asset manager and you're thinking about extending pass-through voting to your clients. Since an asset manager has a fiduciary responsibility to vote in the best interest of their relevant fund, asset managers and advisors should thoughtfully structure a pass-through voting approach to comply with those responsibilities. For example, an asset manager could structure the voting options for investors to make sure they can only select from options that they believe are consistent with their own policies. In addition, they could review the retail votes before they are ultimately submitted to the market. Some considerations for asset managers include reviewing the fund's organizing documents, delegation of voting authority, and voting policies and procedures as well.
So what part does Broadridge play in pass-through voting?
So Broadridge plays a critical role in facilitating the regulatory communication process for funds and corporate issuers when they distribute their proxy materials, as well as other required disclosures to investors. So as such, we have all been frequently approached by the asset management and fund community asking about, various pass-through voting models. And when Broadridge is looking to create these solutions for our clients, we're ensuring that we're keeping the needs of our clients in mind when designing these solutions.
Can you cite use case examples of pass-through voting implementations that are up and running at the moment?
So BlackRock is the most popular example that most know about today. A year or so ago, they went live with a solution that offered institutional investors the ability to give input or vote on the underlying equities that make up pooled investment vehicles. In addition to that, Charles Schwab Asset Management is live as of October 2022, offering retail investors the ability to give their input on 3 funds that they have. So the retail investor in this case is able to tell Schwab how they feel about certain topics that often appear on proxy proposals. And they can take that into consideration when ultimately coming up with their voting policy. And Broadridge was proud to partner with both on those efforts.
Final question. How do you see pass-through voting evolving in the future?
We've gotten a lot of feedback from asset managers on how they see this model looking today, and it's very exploratory. Asset managers don't really know how the underlying investors are going to react to this capability, specifically retail investors. And they want to pilot a number of different options to reach the retail investor and a number of different models for the experience of the retail investor. So we're going to see a number of different pilots coming up this proxy season. We had a couple already in this past fall. And I think we're going to learn a lot from those. And based on, how that comes out, I think we'll see that model continue to evolve to a more meeting specific or binding solution. So rather than it being a polling solution to a retail investor, understanding how they feel about topics, it will navigate towards how do you feel on a particular meeting and this particular proposal within a meeting, and how would you like to vote on that? And we have to be really careful about that experience. We want to make sure that it's a good one for the underlying investor, and Broadridge is really cognizant of that. But we do see a demand to get to that meeting specific solution, likely in the 2024 season, and with a number of pilots coming up in 2023, that will help us learn a lot.
Superb. Well, I've learned a lot about pass-through voting, and I'm sure our viewers and readers to the magazine will have certainly learned a lot as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here at Asset Servicing Times, Danielle.
Great. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure.